Bonjour, bienvenue, Digital Dada podcast. Well, that's where my French ends. Hello everyone, welcome back to another exciting and informative episode of Digital Dada podcast. I'm your host, Cecilia Maundu. I'm a broadcast journalist, a digital security trainer. I'm also an African Union Media Fellow. I work at the intersection of technology, human rights, and journalism. In today's episode, we turn our attention to Senegal, where a quiet transformation is underway, one that could redefine how people access services, prove who they are, and participate in the digital economy. This podcast episode has been made possible by the African Union Media Fellowship Program, which is implemented by the African Union through the Information and Communication Directorate, supported by GIZ on behalf of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. So I'm going to ask the first question, but first, please introduce yourself and the work that you do.
Ok, je suis Ababakar Diop, je suis juriste.
Okay, I'm Abubakar Diop. I'm a lawyer and a former commissioner of data protection. I'm the president of an organization called Junction. Junction works on digital rights in Senegal, especially on freedom of expression, privacy, personal data, protection, cybercrime, in short, everything related to digital rights. We do reflection, research and analysis on digital rights in Senegal, West Africa. We also do awareness raising. That's it for the presentation. Thank you very much.
Voilà pour résumer la présentation. You can?
Merci beaucoup. So I'm going to start the first question.
Yeah.
Can you give us an overview of Senegal's digital ID system and what are its key objectives and how does it fit into the country's digital transformation strategies?
Bon, en matière d'identité numérique au Sénégal, il y a une politique gouvernementale qui a été mise en place.
In terms of digital identity in Senegal, our government policy has been put in place on national digital identity. This policy aims to achieve digital sovereignty and facilitate the access of citizens to public services and the access of citizens to government information. This digital identity policy is based on the fact that Senegal should, for its development, control the data of its citizens in general, the identity data that could boost Senegal's development.
Qui pourrait permettre de booster le développement du Sénégal.
Thank you. To my next question, how does Senegal's digital ID compare to other African nations? Are there unique aspects of the system that can make it stand out?
Disons que en matière d'identité numérique africaine, nous devrons mettre en place des systèmes de collaboration et des systèmes.
In terms of African digital identity, we have set up systems of collaboration and political systems that are regional and continental in terms of digital identity to harmonize all the policies that exist at the national level so that we have a continental reference in terms of digital identity. Otherwise, we will have national policies that can differentiate and that cannot be harmonized. In this case, the African Union should be able to take that lead and try to set up a continental political system in terms of digital identity.
Et essayer de mettre en place une politique continentale en matière d'identité numérique.
What role has the Senegalese government played in ensuring inclusivity? How do you ensure that marginalized community, that is rural population, informal sectors, are not left behind in this issue of digital ID?
Bon, au Sénégal, on a adopté récemment le New Deal technologique et ce New Deal technologique essaye de prendre en compte.
In Senegal, we recently adopted the new technological deal. This new technological deal tries to take into account inclusion and marginalized communities so that no one is left behind. In this context, we must say that in Senegal, government policy since 2008 has been trying to create a policy based on inclusion. In 2008, when the legal system was put in place to regulate digital technology in Senegal, all the parties involved were associated. I remember that I was one of them to define all the legislation that had to frame the information society. Since then, there has been a participatory and inclusive practice for everything related to the revision of these devices, which date from 2008 and which must be adopted to the evolutionary context of current technology. When it comes to local communities, how do you associate them in this dynamic? I think it will be necessary to make a plea effort so that the government also tries to take into account local communities. Thank you.
Associer dans cette dynamique. Et je pense que il va falloir faire un effort de plaidoyer pour que le gouvernement essaie de prendre en compte aussi les communautés locales.
Thank you. What legal frameworks are in place to protect citizens' data in Senegal's digital ID system? How does Senegal's align with global data protection standards like the GDPR?
Bon, il faut dire que le cadre juridique des données au Sénégal.
The legal framework for data protection in Senegal has been governed by the law on personal data protection since 2008. This law currently governs all personal data, but in much a broader way. Recently, in 2004, the government put in place a national data strategy. Normally, in its implementation, it will take into account the legal framework of data beyond personal data. I think that if we manage to have this legal framework for data governance, it will be beneficial for Senegal. In addition to the law on personal data protection, which was adopted in 2000 and 2008, Senegal is not yet fully aligned from a legal point of view with the GDPR. We think that with the law on personal data protection in 2008, we will take into account the directives of the GDPR, including the adaptation to the Senegalese national system. Beyond that, we think that the African Union Convention on Cybercriminality and personal data protection will certainly be revised to try to adapt it to the evolutionary context, which would allow the African states to readapt legislation on personal data. Thank you.
Au plan national, que les États africains puissent réadapter leur législation sur les données. You can.
Merci beaucoup. So, how does Senegal's digital ID system initiative align with the African Union Digital Transformation Strategy 2030?
Oui, bon, il faut dire que le Sénégal a adopté la loi sur la protection des données personnelles en 2008, donc bien avant la convention de Malabo, la convention de l'Union africaine.
Senegal adopted the law on personal data protection in 2008, well before the Malabo Convention and the African Union Convention. So Senegal will have to take this convention into account in its law project, which addresses the law of 2008 to adapt it to the Senegalese national system so that there is harmony in the African context. So Senegal will have to adopt to the Malabo Convention, and in this context I think we will take into account the adoption of this new law on personal data protection, the great principles of the Malabo Convention, and it would be beneficial, and it would also really be something that would make the protection of personal data in Senegal progress.
Progresser la protection des données personnelles au Sénégal. You can.
Thank you. Additionally, what lessons can Senegal share with African nations looking to implement digital ID systems?
Bon, les leçons qu'on pourrait partager, c'est l'expérience que le Sénégal a dans la gestion et dans la gouvernance des données personnelles, parce que depuis 2008,
I think Senegal could share with other African nations the ways in which personal data is governed. In addition, in the digital identification system, I think Senegal could share a number of good practices, especially in the field of telecommunications, by identifying citizens since 2009 to 2010 who would like to sign up to a telecommunications operator. Senegal could also share good practices in the digitalization of the civil state. Since last year, Senegal has been engaged in the digitalization of the civic state and the digitalization of the administration so that citizens can have easy access to public services and have official information from the government.
certain nombre et disposer des informations officielles du gouvernement.
My next question would do, what are the biggest risks associated with digital ID programs in Africa? How do we mitigate issues such as surveillance, data breaches, and identity fraud?
Bon, les risques les risques, c'est surtout par rapport à la sécurisation des infrastructures publiques.
I think it's a big risk because Africa is a little behind in terms of digital public infrastructure security. In this regard, I think Africa needs to make an effort to secure public infrastructure. Secondly, Africa needs to make an effort to make energy available because the security of Liberia is at odds with the availability of energy, especially electricity. I think we have to make an effort. Thirdly, Africa needs to harmonize its fight against cybercrime and cyber attacks. I think that in order to secure data and to secure digital identity, we will have to focus on digital security and fight against cyber attacks and cybercrime.
Et puis avoir une politique de lutte contre les cyberattaques et les cybercriminels.
Mexico? Yes. So, are there partnerships between Senegal and the African Union, ECOWAS, or international organizations to advance digital ID initiatives in Africa?
Bon, au niveau de l'Union africaine, à ma connaissance, il n'y a pas encore...
There is a dynamic partnership, but I don't see a dynamic partnership at the moment. At the level of CDAO, there is a partnership in the definition of the digital identification policy at the level of ECOWAS, at the level of the CDAO, and on this point, I think Senegal is well engaged with other countries in West Africa, and from the point of view of international organizations, Senegal is a member of the 108th Convention of the European Union. And on this point, I think Senegal also benefits from the good practices of the members of the Union of the 108th Convention. And Senegal is really active in this area. And also, it must be said that Senegal is part of the network of authorities for the protection of personal data of the French-speaking countries. And this also is a dynamic partnership that we observe. Thank you. Yes.
Francophone, et ça aussi, c'est un partenariat dynamique qu'on constate et qu'on observe aussi.
So as we come to the end of this conversation, where do you see Senegal's digital ID system in the next 5 years?
Bon, pour les 5 années à venir, le système d'identification numérique du Sénégal doit régler.
Now, for the next 5 years, Senegal's digital ID system must dynamically regulate the security of public infrastructures. It must also regulate the issue of cyber attacks, which is always linked to the security of public infrastructures. But Senegal must also make an effort in its digital ID policy to respect human rights, because it is also important that in this digital ID policy, we also respect fundamental rights and freedoms of Senegal. And I think this is also a very important element. And also, we will have to make an effort in the next 5 years to be able to go much further in digital sovereignty. And I think this is a very, very important thing. And also, in the next 5 years, we will have to see how this digital ID policy can contribute to Senegal's development efforts.
Contribuer à l'effort de développement du Sénégal.
Thank you so much. And now to the last question. What is your message to policymakers and digital rights activists as Africa moves forward with digital ID initiatives?
Bon, le message que j'adresse aux décideurs, c'est surtout d'harmoniser les politiques.
My message to policymakers is to harmonize policies. The harmonization of national identification policies. If we don't harmonize them, everyone will remain in their place at their national level. And I think we have to think in terms of harmonization at the regional and continental level. And also, the second point is that the approach must be inclusive and that all stakeholders are associated in the definition of digital identification policies, whether it is the state, the private sector, civil society, the academic sector, that all stakeholders in the internet ecosystem are always associated. Otherwise, if we leave it to the decision makers to define the policy, there will be no appropriation and there could be a rejection from other stakeholders. So I think the inclusive and participatory approach is very important, and I think all African countries must be able to adopt it, and that the African Union takes the lead in this harmonization policy, and that the African Union and regional institutions take the lead so that we can achieve this harmonization. Thank you so much. Thank you, Cecilia.
nous puissions atteindre cette harmonisation.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in today's episode. I hope we took you to Senegal. I hope you are able to understand the issue of digital IDs in Senegal when it comes to the issue of data protection. In case you have any question, you have our email addresses. Please send us your question and we will try our best to be able to respond. Merci beaucoup. Au revoir.